So V1 was formerly version 1, is a leading document management system for the finance department, especially for around sort of accounts payable, for helping to reduce sort of paper costs. This solution can also use intelligent OCR technology to reduce things like processing time around invoices, and also incorporate things like document-based workflow to help increase efficiencies and reduce the admin time. So what we're going to show you this morning is a very sort of flexible solution. It works with all versions of Sun Systems. I think everybody on the call this morning is a Sun Systems user, be it Sun 4, 5, or 6. So we have a number of clients that use V1 with Sun Systems in varying degrees, if you like. So starting from clients that just use it to scan and store and retrieve images that then linked to Sun Systems, to Vision Q&A reports, potentially applications like IPOS or iDocs in the purchasing department. We've got clients that also use and make use of the OCR facilities, very intelligent and very simple optical character recognition for actually capturing the information on invoices and then helping to sort of automate that capture of information into the respective systems. And we've also got some customers that use the document-based approval for things like routing of invoices and getting those approved. And Dean's going to elaborate and demonstrate further on this. During this session, we've got around about an hour and a half allocated to us. It may take a lot less than that, so it depends on the number of questions we get. If you do have questions, there's a couple of things you can do. You can use the interface screen. There should be a raise hand button, and you can press that button, and then at the end we can unmute you, and you can ask a question to us, and we'll cover that on the call. If during the session you want to type a question, there's a section on there where you can just type your question, and we'll monitor those throughout the session, and we'll make sure that we cover off any questions at the end. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to my colleague Dean, and we're going to take you through the demonstration and discussion around V1.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. Morning, everybody, and thanks for taking the time out to join us on this session. As Paul says, my role at V1 is partner manager, and effectively that just means that I work with our business partners like Sapphire on a day-to-day basis to help them talk to their customers and sell ultimately the V1 technology stack. The objective of this session is really to give you an understanding more than anything else of how document management can be used within your businesses to ultimately streamline processes, improve access to information, reduce costs, and improve staff productivity as well. In terms of an agenda, I'll just give you a brief overview of V1, who we are as an organization. I'm expecting that some of you will have heard of us under our previous name, version 1. But there will probably be people on the call that have never heard of us, so it's probably just worth setting that scene. We'll then look at accounts payable, because as Paul highlighted, accounts payable is really one of the key areas in which V1 can really help an organization streamline processes. We'll assess some of the challenges, and then I'll actually show you some of the solutions that we have to attack those. And then we'll have a Q&A session right at the end, and then we'll wrap it up. And hopefully we'll do that within an hour, actually. But we do have an hour and a half if we have a lot of questions. So just to introduce V1, as Paul has already highlighted, V1 have been authoring document management software for some time. We actually started out back in 1989. So we've got an awful lot of experience and expertise that we've picked up throughout those years. And ultimately, that's what our clients today are benefiting from. We do try and do a good job for our customers, and that's really demonstrated by the software satisfaction awards that we win so far year on year for the past 3 years, and we're really hoping to win it again this year. The software satisfaction awards are awards where customers go out to vote for V1, and it's about the overall experience. So the software doing what it should do, projects being implemented on time and in budget, and also the after-sales support experience being a good one as well. And it's our partners that are a key to that as well. So, for example, any Sapphire customer using V1 is actually interfacing with Sapphire as first line for support. And so our partners do play a key role in that. V1 has a lot of customers in all shapes and sizes globally. I think the last customer count was around about 2,300. Being quite prevalent in the Sun Systems space, Sun Systems is really strong with multi-currency, and so we've got an awful lot of Sun Systems users that are now spread throughout the world. We also have a sister company over in the US operating as V1, and they operate our US sales for us. We've also got resellers and customers over in Australia, so organizations like Qantas. So some really big, good organizations globally using V1 technology. Key thing to mention on today's session, I think we've already highlighted this, but we do operate an established partner network. V1 is a channel-based business, so we don't sell direct. Everything we do is through our partner channel. Sapphire is obviously a key and strategic member for us, but another key and strategic member of our partner network is Infor. So Infor actually have taken V1 and certified it as the document management system for Sun Systems. And so this means that V1 and Infor, from a product management perspective, work very closely together to ensure that the V1 product set is actually delivering real value to Sun Systems users. And what that allows is Infor will be able to focus on their core competency, which is finance and ERP systems, and V1 can deliver the expertise in document management. Just a couple of quick testimonials for you here. I've put up some names hopefully that you'll recognize. The top name, Nichols, you may not recognize that, but you probably recognize one of the brands, which is Vimto. So the key thing to pick out of each of these testimonials is really the cost savings per annum. Nichols saving over £100,000 per annum. Bonhams, the auctioneers, saving at least £60,000 per annum. And the University of Bath, who are only using a small element of the V1 portfolio, still saving £25,000 a year. So the nice thing about V1 is that it is demonstrating real return on investment for those businesses that choose to work with us. And ultimately, any procurement process is likely going to involve building a business case at some point. And of course, that's something that we've got a lot of experience in doing and can help you with. Just to talk through the solution portfolio at a high level, at the heart of really everything we do these days is our core document archive. So this is the piece of technology that allows you to store documents, images, and associated search information for those documents and images. So if we take a purchase invoice, for example, search information and criteria against that might be supplier name, supplier code, invoice date. It might be journal number that we've actually got back from some systems, a net tax and gross amount, etc. So we can search on any of those fields in order to find that document again. That comes with also some basic scanning functionality. So if you have a requirement which is simply, I want to scan some stuff and store it and find it again, the document archive module is perfect for you. If you're actually looking for a little bit more and want to automate some of the processes around finance, then you're going to be considering automatic data capture and document authorization. Automatic data capture uses sophisticated optical character recognition technology, and that automatically interprets and reads documents such as purchase invoices, extracts pertinent data off of those documents, and makes that available to Sun Systems to post the transaction. In addition, we've got document authorization, which allows not only authorization, but actually coding up of transactions as well as part of that process. And that can be done by either the budget holders or by accounts payable. And each business will work in a different way, but the key thing is that the V1 technology stack is flexible enough to support whatever way it is that you work. Key thing to point out, everything is modular, so you can just buy the archive. You don't need to buy that with the data capture and authorization. Equally, you could just buy the archive with authorization without the optical character recognition. So it's just worth bearing that in mind. What I'm covering today shows those three components to create what we would really refer to as a best practice solution for accounts payable. If we look at a fairly typical paper-based process for, again, a typical Sun Systems user. So this is what we find when we go out and speak to most customers using Sun Systems. This is the process that they follow. Paper invoices would typically come into a central point, typically be coming into accounts payable. Accounts payable then effectively register those invoices into Microsoft Excel. And what they tend to record, we find, is supplier name, invoice date, and an invoice amount, and also who they're sending that invoice to for approval. The invoice is then typically photocopied, sent out to the budget holder to get them to code it and approve it. Maybe a stamp supplied to the photocopy at that time as well, which is just your typical coding grid stamp. The approval will typically then sign it, send it back to accounts payable, who then post that transaction into some systems. The key thing is that in that process there is a little bit of duplication. We've got registration of the invoice, which is data entry. We've got a budget holder that's writing information onto the invoice, and then that's being rekeyed again by someone in accounts payable further down the line. And then at the very end of that process, once everything's been completed, accounts payable will then take responsibility for filing that invoice away in some structured filing system, again typically going to be paper-based. Another key point to raise now is that a lot of organizations are starting to see more and more invoices come in via email, and those are coming in as PDF and TIFF attachments. What we're finding is that those organizations that don't have any document management technology, what they're doing is printing those documents out in order to process them just like the rest of their invoices. And that's a little bit counterproductive. You know, if we've got something electronically, it makes most sense to try and deal with it electronically. So just to reiterate some of the key challenges there, first and foremost, manual data entry is expensive and time-consuming. Another key point is that paper approvals are unreliable and time-consuming. And what I mean by unreliable, it doesn't mean that they don't happen. It just means that because that process is outside of the control of accounts payable, i.e. it's an IT manager that's taking responsibility for doing something in a timely fashion, we can't rely on that task being completed within the timescales that we might need it to be done. So if we've got a supplier who has payment terms with us of 14 days, we need to ensure that the IT manager approves that invoice within that time frame, and that doesn't always occur. And as a result of that, AP will spend a lot of time chasing invoice approvers, and every now and again having to send copies of those invoices. And we do every now and again speak to organizations that actually send out the original invoices rather than photocopies. And if the original goes missing, it just means that an embarrassed phone call to the supplier to ask for a copy. Slow approval can mean late payment charges, and it also means potentially missing out on early settlement discounts. Those might not be significant, but you know, even if you can negotiate a 0.25% discount for paying within a certain time frame, then across all of your spend, or even half of your spend, that becomes quite a substantial sum. And of course, there's the paper filing and retrieval. It is pretty labor intensive, and it's every now and again error prone. Things get misfiled. And the key thing about all of this is that accounts payable are bearing the burden of it. Even if it's someone in IT that's actually the cause of the problem, is accounts payable have to pick up the pieces. So this is the automated solution process, and like I said before, this is what we would refer to as best practice. Paper invoices come into a central point. That would still be accounts payable. They then, before they do anything with those invoices, they scan them into the V1 software. That means that you have an image, it's stored in the V1 software, it's safe, secure, never going to get lost. But because we've got the image, we can actually work on that image within the software. So that image is then passed on to the recognition and data capture process, where the optical character recognition is applied. the pertinent data extracted. Equally, that information is validated for accuracy. Also making sure that, for example, it's not a duplicate invoice for that supplier, making sure that the supplier exists, all that kind of stuff we will validate to ensure that it is going to be successfully posted into Sun at the end of the day. Once invoices have been processed through the recognition engine, they're then sent on to budget holders for approval and coding. And finally, at the end of that process, they're posted to Sun, but an image of the invoice is archived so that it's always available for you to retrieve in the future. And coming back to the emailed invoices that come in via PDF or TIFF, then there's no need to print those out in order to scan them in. They can actually just be automatically dropped into the V1 software, so that effectively the V1 software is working with the electronic document and not a scanned piece of paper. And that's really key. And if you think about how many suppliers are currently sending in electronic invoices to you now, if you actually went out and encouraged your suppliers to do that because you were rolling out V1, then actually, we're finding a lot of our customers are getting about 60–70% of their invoices coming in electronically, and it actually removes that job of scanning entirely. So what I'm going to do is, I've talked enough through slide decks. I think it's actually worth just showing you the software in action now. I'm going to go through that exact process. We're going to scan some invoices. We're going to go and show you how the data is captured from those invoices, and then I'm going to show you how the workflow process works as well. So up and running, I've got a virtual machine. I'll just resize this for the webinar. So what you should be able to see on screen now is Sun Systems. I'm actually running this against Sun Systems 5, but it equally works with Sun Systems 6 and Sun Systems 4. The key difference, by the way, with Sun Systems 4 is that drill downs from Sun 4 itself are not possible. And I'll show you what I mean by that later on. So the first stage in this process is to scan some invoices in. So V1 scanning application is on your screens now, and what you can see is that there's no images yet being scanned. We've got a couple of buttons at the top here that are being configured. So we've got OCR invoices, which are optical character recognition, and barcoded invoices. So because we're going to scan these invoices and pass them on to the optical character recognition process, I'm going to click on this button. And what that does is, when I click that button, it tells the scanner to start scanning, and the scanner will start pulling documents through and present them to the user on screen. So you can see it's pretty quick, and we've got a batch of invoices here on screen. We would typically recommend dedicated scanners, and the reason that we recommend dedicated scanners is because they enable batch scanning, but also it means that we can use the V1 scanning software, which has an awful lot of technology built into it for image cleanup. So it will automatically despeckle, it will deskew, it will automatically orientate the images the right way. So if you scan an invoice upside down, it will automatically flip it the right way up by recognizing the direction of text. So there's a lot of technology there. So if you've, again, got suppliers that want to send in fancy invoices with loads of color and watermarks, which when you find, if you photocopy them, they don't come out that great. And the same is the case if you were to scan them on your multifunction photocopiers. By using the V1 technology, it can actually drop out a lot of those watermarks and bring forward the text. And that's really important for the recognition process. So we've got our batch of invoices here. I'm purely just checking them for quality. Once I'm happy that I can read all the text, I can click on the tick and say I'm happy with that batch. And once I'm happy with the batch, it's simply going to export them from the scanning PC over to the server where all the recognition is going to take place. So that's the job of scanning complete. It's really simple and really easy. And the idea of these configured buttons is that from a user perspective, these are actually meaningful. It might just say invoices. It might, if you wanted to scan HR records, you could have a button there that says HR records. You could have payroll to scan in payroll documents. And behind the buttons themselves, it's actually configured the workflow through the V1 software. So whether it's just going to go straight to the archive, whether it's going to go to workflow, or whether it's going to go through OCR and workflow. And equally, at the end of that, where in the document archive is it going to get filed? And that's really important, again, when it comes to security. So the next stage in the process is to look at the document capture. So whilst I've been talking there, those invoices that we've just scanned in have been processed by the V1 OCR software. It's recognized them, it's validated the information that's been extracted, and it's presenting them back here to us, each line representing one invoice. And you should be able to see there that there's a status associated with each one. That status refers to the validation status. So we can see that there's one there that has a validation error. And the reason that the error has occurred is because what it's saying is that the document's been recognized as an invoice, and it's recognized it, we can see the supplier code and supplier name. So it's recognized it as an invoice for that supplier, but it's not actually been able to find a template in the knowledge base. And what that means is that effectively each supplier has a template or a fingerprint of their invoice layout stored in the V1 knowledge base. And there are going to be instances where you get new suppliers that come on board and there's no matching template set up in the knowledge base. And so there's going to be a process, A, for the software to learn that layout, but potentially there's also a requirement for someone in the organization to teach it where to find that information. But the key thing is this is all done on the fly. It's not like you've got to go into a separate application to create a template. It's all done from the V1 software that you see in front of you now. The majority of the invoices you would expect to come through with a status of OK. But what that means is all the data's been read, it's been validated, and it's ready to go. So this is a good summary screen, but actually where the data is verified by users is in this interface here. And I'll just resize this so you can see what it looks like in a real operating environment. You're presented with the image of the invoice there on the left-hand side, and the data that we've set it to extract there on the right-hand side. Now, something that I want to point out straight away is that the data fields here on the right-hand side, these are just a sample demo data set that we're extracting. We've got loads of customers that have lots of different fields that we're either reading from the invoice, calculating, or pulling back from another system. So what you see isn't exhaustive. It's not the same solution for every customer. It is very, very configurable. But what you can see is the key data in order to post the invoice into Sun is there being captured. So we've got the invoice number, the invoice date, description, net tax and gross amounts, and down here at the bottom we've got the data is appearing valid to the software. Just to explain exactly how the software is doing all of this, the first thing that the software does is it reads all of the information on the invoice and it looks for something unique. Now typically in the European Union that's going to be a VAT registration number of some sort. And the way that the software finds that, it doesn't matter where it is on the invoice, it looks for a pattern of words. So typically here in the UK it might say VAT registration number or VAT reg no, and then typically after that or just below it we're going to get a 9-digit number which is perhaps sometimes preceded by a GB. Once our software finds that, it then is able to identify that supplier inside some systems. If the supplier doesn't quote a VAT registration number, it will then look up as a second fallback is the company registration number. And if it doesn't quote either of those on the invoice, then on the first time we see that invoice from that supplier, it's simply down to us to tell the software what to use. And in the main, that's going to be something like a telephone number or a postcode. And then that becomes effectively that unique identifier for that supplier moving forward. As well as a primary identifier, we do have an option which can be turned on or off by supplier, which is a secondary identifier. And this is really to disambiguate between multiple accounts for the same supplier. So if, for example, you've got one supplier that invoices in several currencies, you may have a separate account set up for each currency that they invoice in. Equally, if you've got the same supplier but multiple pay sites, you probably have a different account for each of those. So that secondary identifier allows us to use some piece of information on the invoice itself to determine actually which specific account it is we want to use inside Sun. Quite commonly, it's going to be something like a postcode, if it's pay site related, or if it's currency related, you could potentially actually just use the currency symbols. The supplier code and supplier name here are being pulled from Sun. The currency is the default currency for that supplier in Sun. In my demo environment, I've disabled overriding that because we only have one currency for each supplier in Sun at the moment in the demo environment. If you wanted, you can override that, so you can set it as an overridable option. So it would maybe pick up the default currency for that supplier in Sun, but if they potentially were going to invoice under US dollars under the same account, you could always update that here, and it would pass through it the value as a US dollar amount. It's identified that it's an invoice. Obviously, the other option is going to be a credit. And the way that it does this is it looks at the words on the document. So here it says invoice right in the middle. Typically, if that was a credit, that word would say credit. And it's at that point that the software would then flip this to say the transaction type is a credit. The invoice number has been read from the invoice, and you can see it highlights it in green. And that's just highlighting to the user where it's extracting that piece of information from. Same with the date. You'll notice that the date is written September, but it's translated that to 09 because Sun needs a numeric and it can't work with a textual date. Typically, you'd have validation switched on for the date. I've switched it off for the demo because I use a variety of different invoices. But typically, you wouldn't allow an invoice to be older than 90 days, and you typically wouldn't allow it to be in the future. The description is limited. I think with Sun 4 it's limited to 30 characters, and I think with Sun 5 it's 50. Paul, you'll probably correct me on that, but I believe that's what it is. And that's predominantly because of the limits set within Sun systems.
Yeah, that's correct.
We've got then our net tax and gross amounts, and the kind of validation that software is applying there is the net plus the tax must equal the gross. So the software is just double checking that all that data is correct and valid. If you get suppliers that invoice in different dates, so you might get a US supplier who invoices month, day, rather than our UK date format, which is day, month. You can set by supplier what date format you're expecting the invoice to come in. Equally with the currencies, you can actually set the kind of numeric format that it's going to be in. So you can set it to expect a comma, and this would be for French invoices where they put a comma rather than a decimal point. You can also set it so that it's actually looking for a dollar amount, and the reason that there is a dollar amount bias there is because with OCR, quite a common misread is the number 5 for a dollar sign, especially when it's next to a series of other numbers. Because of the algorithms that are in place, that's quite a common misread. So, and vice versa as well, a 5 does also misread as a dollar sign. So the V1 software does make corrections. So if it's expecting it to be a UK GBP amount, but it finds a dollar sign, it makes an automatic assumption that that's actually a 5. And by setting it to expect a dollar amount, if it sees a dollar sign, it actually knows that it's a dollar sign. So there's all that kind of technology which is built into the software just to make sure that any auto-correction is actually overridden. The data on this invoice is valid, so all that I need to do as a user is click on accept, and it moves me on to the next invoice. So this is the invoice, if you remember that the software failed validation on it, gave us a validation error, and it said that the document was recognized but there was no matching template. But what you can actually see is that even though there's no matching template in the knowledge base, that the software's actually found some information. And the way that it does that is it falls back, when there's no template, it falls back on a learning algorithm. So it will actually try and learn the layout for itself, effectively making a best guess at where everything is going to be. And it uses the same kind of technology that it uses to find the VAT number, so it will look for a series and pattern of words. So just before an invoice date, you'll get the word date or invoice date, something of that ilk. And just after that, or just below it, you're going to get a series of numbers and words which would represent the date, and they're always going to be in a specific format. The same is true for invoice number. And within the V1 software, there's a dictionary already built there for those words that we're expecting to see. So it's automatically found the net, the tax, and the gross as well. So it's done a really good job here. The one field that it's struggled to find is the description. And the description is always going to be a challenge from software to find automatically. A lot of our customers will just manually type in the description, which you can do from here. If you want to get the software to use a bit of information from the invoice itself, to train it is simply just click and drag and drop on the invoice. So you can see I'm clicking around a couple of words within the line description there, and when I release the mouse, it then populates the box there on the right-hand side with that information. If I were to click accept at this point, it would commit that data to the next stage in the process, which is workflow, but it would also store this information as a template in the knowledge base. So the next time we get an invoice from this supplier, it would look for the invoice number automatically at that area there at the top. It would look for the invoice date in that area. Just something to point out actually when I look at this. So what we have down at the bottom of the invoice is we've got a summary box there on the right-hand side, but the software is using the data on the bottom left. Now the chances are with this invoice, what's there on the bottom left is always going to match what's there on the bottom right. But if you ever wanted to override what the software has learned, it's really easy, and again, you just need to click and drag and drop. So you can simply select the area on the invoice that you want to retrain it on, and it's released. And the same is true with your tax amount. You can retrain it and release it, and it's now using these fields here rather than the fields on the left-hand side. So the key thing is the software will learn it and make a best guess, but if you ever want to override that information, that's your prerogative. It's you that decides ultimately what to use. If I now hit a check, it's saying that the data is now valid, and I can accept that. All the other invoices are actually okay, so we could go back to the summary screen. We could just select them all and accept them all at the same time rather than having to go through them one by one. But what I'll do is I'll just come to an American invoice where what we're using is the unique identifier is the telephone number. So this is, you'll see it's rather than saying VAT, VAT number detection, it's using a floating identifier, which we have determined what that is. And in this case, it's the phone number. I've got a secondary identification, which is saying USA. Maybe it's because there's multiple pay sites. And that's then linked it to this supplier account. And obviously, the currency is US dollars. And so this is a USD invoice. And I can accept this as well. If I come back to our summary screen and do a quick refresh, we've got just that one invoice there. And just to highlight, you can multiple select invoices that are here and click on accept. So if you had 100 that were all okay, you could select 100 in one or two mouse clicks, click on accept, and they're all passed through without us actually having to look at them. So then all that would leave in that case would be those exceptions that we need to deal with. So that's the scanning process and the data capture process done. We've done very little work actually so far, but the software's done an awful lot for us. What I'm going to do is move on now to the workflow process. So my workflow is pretty straightforward. I've just got one route. Typically you'd have multiple routes within your workflow process. This is again just to give you a flavor of how the software works, what it's capable of doing. But my route has two approvers in it. First one is a manager and then a director. The manager is able to approve anything up to £2,000. Anything above that value goes to the director for their approval. But of course the manager is the first stage in every single approval, so the manager has to approve it before the director sees anything anyway. So within some systems you can within Sun 5 build links to the V1 applications, so it just shows that level of integration a little bit more. So I'm logging in there as the manager, and as the manager I'm there presented with my 8 invoices that I've got to approve. So again, a summary screen first, but actually to process it I just double click and it presents me with an image of the invoice and the data that's been extracted, and also some coding information down here in a grid. Now, apologies for the size, but with webinar it tends to restructure the resolution of my screen a little bit, so it's all a little bit squashed. So what we can see here is in my demo system I've got analysis dimensions, product type, department, project, employee code, tax. You in your organizations might have cost center in there, all that kind of stuff as your analysis dimensions. So this is just giving you an idea. There are no limits to how many analysis dimensions you can actually code up on in V1. So with Sun 6 there are extended analysis, and so those are actually supported by the V1 technology, but for most users out there I'm suspecting you won't be using any more than 10 anyway. If we want to code up, we can do it manually. So we've got drop-down lists, and these drop-down lists are direct lookups against what's held in Sun systems. So we've got our account code, our analysis dimensions here, and if we close an account code or create a new code in one of the analysis dimensions, then that will automatically be available straight away for the next user. If we want to split the invoice over a couple of lines, we can do that here, and we just enter in the value for the second line and obviously adjust the value for the first line, and the software will validate that to make sure that it balances. So obviously we don't want to be passing stuff through to Sun that's not going to balance. So it is easy to create, and there's no limit against the number of lines. You can just tab through and create as many lines as you want.
Indeed.
You can also delete lines. Sorry, Paul, we've got a question, do we?
Yeah, one of the customers asked us about coding invoices for multiple business units. So Dean's obviously showing here the coding in terms of accounts and analysis. But you could also, if you're scanning invoices for multiple business units within Sun Systems, one of the codings that you could include would be the appropriate business unit, and that would be posted accordingly in Sun Systems.
Yeah, yeah. So, and it's a good point. So, some businesses will have an analysis dimension to effectively differentiate between their business units, but some customers will actually have a completely separate business unit set up in Sun. So in my demo system I've got a business unit that we're using called PK1 for this demo, but I can actually at scanning point have different scanning profiles for different business units. So at the moment if you process invoices separately for each of those business units in a separate batch, the most sensible way would be actually to batch those up into business units and scan them under those business units. If you wanted to actually scan them all under the same batch and then decide which business unit it was associated with, that would probably be done at the capture stage, which we've just come out of. So once, as a budget holder, I've coded up the invoice, my job is then to accept, query, or reject. The other thing I just want to highlight is this job of coding, it can be done by accounts payable. There's no reason why accounts payable couldn't be the first step in the approval process. And it just means that you have segregation of duties there as well. So you can have someone in the accounts team who perhaps doesn't need to know that much about the account codes and your analysis dimensions doing the data capture piece, because that doesn't really involve too much finance knowledge about your business. But maybe the coding is done by a management accountant or something like that, in which case they could just use the workflow and don't need to get involved in data capture. As a budget holder, if I reject an invoice, it will ask me for a reason why I'm rejecting the invoice. If I just say it's not my invoice. Typically when you reject something, there is a rule that's triggered, and in 95% of sites it gets bounced back to accounts payable, who then decide how to handle that. And it might be that they make contact with the supplier, or they just reroute it onto someone else. If I query an invoice, again, same thing, it'll ask me for a reason as to why I'm querying this invoice. And it might be that the goods haven't been received yet. And again, the difference between reject is that a reject tends to get bounced onto someone else, so typically accounts payable. A query will actually stay with me as the budget holder, but that comment is just available to accounts payable to see why I'm not yet approving that. And then finally, we've got the option of accept. So if I accept an invoice, it simply moves on to the next stage in the process. So if it's within my limit, which you can see on screen, this one is, it's £300, that will go straight into Sun Systems. If I accept an invoice, which is above £2,000, it's going to go to the director. So I do have an example of that. So I'll just put this one's not mine, so I'll reject another one. I'll accept this one because of the value. You can see there it's 2,750, so that one should go through to the director. And again, with the corporate furnishings invoice, that should go through to the director. What I'll do is I'll leave that one unapproved. So that now has one invoice that I've got on query with me, and you can see the comment is associated with it now, the goods not received. And I've got one invoice that I've actually not done anything with. So the last action is still that it's a completely new entry in the system. You can see that on this action column here. If I log out and I log in as the director will simply see those two invoices that were above that threshold. So again, same screen, exactly the same look and feel for the different users. If he double clicks on that, it just shows him or her that invoice. And then the director can accept. And when you accept all of the invoices in your queue, it then tells you you've got nothing left to authorize, and it's effectively an empty screen. There's nothing left for me to do as the director. And finally, just to show you the accounts payable workbench, so it's exactly the same look and feel, but the key difference for accounts payable users is that they actually get visibility of every single invoice that's in the organization at any point in time. So we can see here, as an accounts payable user, that I've got one invoice there, and if I just reshuffle these columns, this was rejected by the manager because it wasn't their invoice. And again, with this one down here, rejected by the manager because it wasn't their invoice. You can also, like I say, shuffle these columns around so you can actually search and filter on them. So if I need to search on a particular supplier, I can say, show me all the details that we've got for AM labels. And we can see there very quickly, if AM labels are on the phone saying, why haven't you paid our invoice yet? Well, the reason we haven't paid your invoice yet is because the manager of that department is saying that we haven't received your goods. This word manager, by the way, would typically be an individual's name. It wouldn't be manager or director. It would actually be Dean McGlone or Paul Callahan or something along those lines. If the supplier at that point says, well, we have sent the goods, what we can do is send a reminder just by right-clicking and sending a reminder. And just to point out that everything in the V1 workflow is driven by email notifications. So if I open my Outlook, we can see that the manager has had 9 emails and the director has had 2. So the manager received 8 emails initially for those 8 invoices that we scanned in, and they've just received that additional authorization reminder that I've just sent out from the accounts payable workbench. And the director has received those notifications too. The key thing about these is it contains basic information about the invoice, but also a link which will take you to the V1 authorization software to action it. So the users don't need to actively log into the software in order to find out whether they've got any invoices to approve. It's email notification driven. And also updates can be automated. So if, for example, the user hasn't touched an invoice for 7 days, you can automatically drop them an email without having accounts payable to actually do anything. If someone's on holiday, such as the manager we know is on holiday, we can always change that route and put it onto someone else in the business. Okay, I think that I've covered off the approvals enough now. If there are any questions, we can pick those up in a couple of minutes because I'm getting pretty close to the end of this session. The next stage in the process is simply to show you the fact that those transactions have made it into Sun Systems. So what I'm going to do is do a quick journal inquiry and look at all the transactions that have come in today. And if I do that, we can see that those 4 invoices that have been approved Of course, 2 had to have been approved by the manager, but all of those invoices have come through as approved. We see that the software has automatically created the tax lines for us. Where there wasn't a tax amount, it's not actually created a tax line for us. And of course, we've got all the analysis and the account code information there as well. The key thing as well at this point is we've got another button within Sun Systems. And this is what I was referring to at the beginning when I said there's a difference between Sun 4 and the other versions of Sun. Sun 4, you cannot have this button within the Sun screens, but you can still have drill down links from within Q&A or Vision, as some people might still know it. What this button allows us to do is highlight a transaction, click on the button, and it opens up an image for us to view the invoice straight away. So we don't have to go out of Sun in order to log into V1. It's just done directly from here. And so we can see down at the bottom here, there was no tax, and hence why there was no tax line created in Sun. Key thing to point out is we do link documents together. So a key document that we link to the invoice is, of course, the authorization audit trail. So because we no longer have signatures on invoices to represent who's approved it, what we do need to record is details of who's done it anyway. So we can see for this invoice, we've got details of who's done what, the directors approved it, the date, the time, and also as a second page, I'll just resize, we've got the authorization coding, so we've actually got the coding information that was used for that invoice as well. So that's just really useful information, and that's going to be important from when new auditors come in and say, show me who's approved this invoice, approve it. And like I say, typically this wouldn't say manager or director, that would say someone's name, so you can actually specify exactly who it is. From the viewing component, you can print a document, you can email it, you can zoom in, zoom out, everything that you'd expect to be able to do. For those users that may not have access to Sun Systems, you can actually enable them to search on invoices directly within Sun Systems, directly within V1, sorry. And to do that, there's simply a web-based search tool. You can open that in Internet Explorer like I've got here. You can roll this out to any user that's licensed to use the V1 software. And you can see I've got access to a number of different document types, not just purchase invoices. And if I click on purchase invoices, remember I was talking about search information. Here we have the search information associated with purchase invoices that I can use in order to find documents again. So I can search on supplier name, supplier code, currency, or any combination of those. You've also got operators, so I can say equals, not equals, and if I do a search where it says not equals and just create a full search, what it'll do is effectively just give me a list of all those invoices that we've scanned in that don't have or don't equal that in the supplier name, and there's the 8 invoices we received today. So you'll notice that actually, even though there are invoices that haven't been posted into Sun Systems yet, we've actually got the image of the invoice in the V1 software visible for people to look at if they want to. And they just simply click on the magnifying glass and it takes them to an image of the invoice. You can, as a Sun Systems user, also get direct access through Sun Systems. If you want to run ad hoc searches through Sun Systems, you just do that from here. And again, it's just showing the level of integration with Sun 5 and 6. So again, it's not possible with 4, but it's possible with Sun 5 and 6. I guess finally, just to wrap things up, if you are using Q&A, you can run a report, and you've got the ability to add drill down links at the end of that report. So you can see there we've got that view button, which is effectively just a hyperlink within our Excel spreadsheet. We can click on one of those and it can open up an invoice for us. And this is also just showing that as well as the V1 authorized software working as you've seen it today, there is a mobile solution. And the mobile solution effectively allows remote users to accept, query, or reject an invoice. And you can see here, this is what it looks like on my iPad. I'm presented with an attachment, which is the invoice. In this case, we sent it as a TIFF, but you can send it as a PDF to budget holders if you need to. and it has operator buttons in the email itself to allow me to accept, reject, or query. And so that's all email driven, and it actually doesn't even need me to download a mobile application in order for it to work. And it is platform independent, so this will work on my BlackBerry, it will work on my iPad, my iPhone or Android device as well. It will even work in Microsoft Outlook. So if you don't want to have to click into the V1 software in order to approve something, you can simply do it from this application.